This is Michael Afton, the protagonist of FNaF Sister Location, and he is half of one of the most common beliefs in the FNaF community, that being that Michael is the protagonist of FNaF 1, Mike Schmidt. But this belief has been brought into question with the release of the Five Nights at Freddy's 2 movie, where Mike Schmidt and Michael Afton existed as separate characters, with Mike Schmidt being the FNaF 1 guard, and Michael being the FNaF 2 guard. We'll talk about that later. The theory of them being separate people is called Mike-tosis. Now, most people have come to their senses and understand that Mike is still Michael in the games, but some people have started to consider the idea. I am not really one of them, but I do think it's important to prepare for a potential future where they are separate, just in case. Now, to be very clear, I do not believe that they are separate. In fact, the more I think about this video, the more confident I am that they are the same, but I think it's fun to play around with the idea, even if I don't really like it. And to distinguish between them, I'm going to be calling Mike Schmidt Mike, and Michael Afton Michael. So where do we begin? I think the first thing we have to establish is who Mike Schmidt and Michael Afton are. Ever since people have started to consider this idea, I've seen a lot of people start saying that Mike Schmidt is the Foxy brother from FNaF 4, and the crying child was his younger brother Garrett, and the sister's room that we can find belongs to Abby. However, I don't believe this. I think that if they are separate, Michael is still the older brother, and the FNaF 4 family is still the Aftons. I think this because we know that William is somehow involved with the crying child due to Sister Location's break room, which shows him observing something that either is or is a recreation of the FNaF 4 neighborhood. There's also the recent implications of William Afton owning Edwin Murray's house, which is clearly the FNaF 4 house. So yeah, I think that the FNaF 4 family are still the Aftons. Now, let's talk about the protagonists of each game under this idea of Mike and Michael being separate. Now, I have a lot of ideas, so this section might be a little unfocused, but stick with me, because one of these games is a lot less simple than you may think. In FNaF 1, it would be Mike Schmidt, and then for Sister Location, we'd be playing as Michael, sure. But do we play as them in any other games? Well, let's focus on Michael first. Like I said, Michael would be the protagonist of Sister Location, but there is something else that he is the protagonist of, that being the survival logbook. When we're given the logbook, the first thing we're told is that the book belonged to someone named Mike. But under this theory, we know that it can't be Mike Schmidt, even though Mike Schmidt does similar stuff in another book, Tickets to Fun, because Mike Schmidt is Michael Afton. But again, this is all under the assumption that they are not. Anyway, we know that this is Michael Afton because he references Sister Location, and Michael goes by Mike in Sister Location. Can we use this book to track down any other Michael appearances in the series? Well, yeah, probably. First things first, we know that this book is a security logbook, so Michael Afton was definitely a security guard at one point, which means that, under this idea, Scott wrote two characters that went by the name Mike, that worked as a security guard at a Freddy's location. But hey, maybe they worked at different locations, right? Well, based on the illustrations in the logbook, which depict Foxy in the FNaF 3 office, and Foxy in the book seems to represent Michael, with him reading a magazine on the first night, a Screw Bolts and Hairpins magazine, which is referenced by Hand Unit Sister Location, and Foxy also seems to represent what the book tells Michael to do. If Foxy represents Michael, and he is in the FNaF 3 office, that likely means Michael is the FNaF 3 guard. Though under Mike-tosis, I'm open to the idea of the FNaF 3 guard being someone else. Either Hudson Foster, from what we found, a story that is inspired by FNaF 3, that has him as the guard, Cassie's dad from the modern storyline, or maybe even Mike Schmidt himself, but for now I am confident in the idea that Michael is the FNaF 3 guard. Can we use the logbook to find any other games in the series where we might play as Michael? Well, actually, yeah. In the logbook, there's a page that asks Michael about recent dreams, and in this section, he draws Nightmare Fredbear. This tells us that Michael has nightmares about Nightmare Fredbear, right? And I think this is clearly implying that Michael is the protagonist of FNaF 4. I mean, there would quite literally be no reason for this to be written into the book if that was not what we were supposed to take away from it, which does get a bit weird since we hear the FNaF 1 phone calls during FNaF 4, and the gameplay parallels FNaF 1, implying our protagonist worked there, but I'll touch on that later. So far, it's likely that we play as Michael in FNaF 3, 4, and Sister Location. Although there is something else we should consider. In the FNaF 2 movie, Michael is the FNaF 2 guard. Could this carry over to the games? Well, it's all but confirmed Michael is the Save Them Purple guy, but what about him being Jeremy or Fritz? I don't know. I think I could easily see this just being something for the films, and it doesn't carry over the games. But I do think him being the security guard is interesting, and is pretty okay evidence for him working at the FNaF 2 location. So that's Michael done. Now let's talk about Schmidt again. Obviously, he would be the FNaF 1 protagonist, but could he be one of the two player characters in FNaF 2? Well, actually, I think it's possible, maybe even likely. Let's talk about Fritz Smith first. The theory of Mike Schmidt being Fritz Smith has been around since FNAF 2's original release, so it's really not that insane, and there is some decent evidence for it. The most popular evidence is of course them both being fired for tampering with the animatronics and odor, which could connect the two characters, although Mike is also fired for general unprofessionalism, which Fritz isn't. There's also the fact that Fritz Smith's last name is Smith, and Mike's last name is Schmidt. Why is this important? Because Schmidt is the German equivalent of Smith. They are basically the same last name, so this could be a connection between the characters. Although Schmidt and Smith are two very popular last names, so it's possible it's a coincidence, I guess. And the reasons for being fired could just be a joke on Scott's part, and he isn't actually implying a connection between the two characters. Although, the FNAF movies actually do give some further evidence for the idea. In FNAF 1, when Mike works his first night at Freddy's, he gets a videotape presumably left by William with his name on it, Mike. But there's actually another name on the tape. Written in faded text is the name Fritz. While this could be just an Easter egg, it could be a connection between the characters of Mike Schmidt and Fritz Smith. Maybe even the Easter egg is the connection between the characters. And then in the FNAF 2 movie, Mike Schmidt plays a night at FNAF 2, much like Fritz Smith, who only worked one night at the FNAF 2 location. So overall, the idea of Mike Schmidt being Fritz Smith is pretty strong, but what about him being FNAF 2's other main protagonist, Jeremy Fitzgerald? Well, there's actually some decent evidence for it. In the FNAF Tickets to Fun book, a book that we know was owned by Mike Schmidt since he writes in it, we get a few objects, some of which are given to us by Fazent, a FNAF 2 security badge, a flashlight, and some tickets. But there are some other items as well. The newspaper Mike reads to get the job in FNAF 1, and Jeremy Fitzgerald's paycheck. And I know what you may be thinking, couldn't Jeremy's paycheck have just been given to Mike by Fazbear Entertainment, like some of the other stuff? Well, technically it's possible, I guess, but I think it's unlikely, because the book never says that Fazbear Entertainment gave it to him, and I doubt they gave him the newspaper as well. Also, why would they give Mike Jeremy's paycheck anyway? You could say that Jeremy was never given it and they were trying to get rid of it for some reason, but we know that Mike wasn't the first security guard at the FNAF 1 location. So why wouldn't they just give it to Ralph or some other employee? The only way that Jeremy's paycheck makes sense is if Mike had the paycheck prior to the book, like the newspaper. Or it's some weird meta thing, but I also feel like that doesn't make much sense because they very easily could have just not included it, and like, is the newspaper meta too? So that would imply that Mike Schmidt is Jeremy Fitzgerald and maybe Fritz Smith. Although I think that seems a little less likely. However, that feels really weird if Mike and Michael aren't the same person. Because why is Mike Schmidt working at the FNAF 2 location? And why did he not show up again after FNAF 1? Well, there is a possible explanation. You see, ever since I started playing around with this idea of Mike and Michael being two separate people, I've come to a disturbing realization that, under the idea, there's a good chance that Michael Afton isn't the FNAF 6 protagonist, but rather, it is Mike Schmidt. Wait, don't click off, hear me out. Okay, I know this idea is like really bad from a storytelling and narrative perspective, but stick with me. So, in the FNAF movies, it seems very likely that Mike Schmidt is going to be taking up the role of the FNAF 6 protagonist, with how he is the only character to talk to Henry, which to be fair, we know isn't actually a trait of the FNAF 6 protagonist, since Henry says the job wasn't intended for them, but still. Mike is the only character to have screen time with Henry. And then in the post-credit teaser for the FNAF 2 movie, Henry leaves an audio log specifically for Mike, like he does for the FNAF 6 protagonist, and even says, leaving dead space, the same thing Henry says in FNAF 6. And if we want to use the movies as evidence, which I think we can under this idea of the two characters being separate, Scott seems to be making Mike Schmidt be the FNAF 6 protagonist of the movies, which could be a hint towards the games. In looking at FNAF 6, there really isn't much evidence for the idea itself, but there's really nothing going against the idea of Schmidt FFPS either. Let's look at the death lines we get after an animatronic kills us, which are really the only things we get hinting at our protagonist's identity, starting with Molten Freddy.
Together again!
This line is commonly used as evidence for the protagonist being Michael, since Molten Freddy, who is entered, would be together again with Michael after Sister Location. But it works with Mike, too. If Molten Freddy is possessed by the spirits of the FNAF 1 animatronics, which is likely, and if you don't know, you can see many videos talking about it, just look up MoltenMCI on YouTube, they would be together again with Mike after FNAF 1. But he doesn't really say anything that goes for or against the idea. I will admit, the line,
"It feels like home,"
makes much more sense with Michael, in my opinion, since it would feel like home since all of her family is back in one place. But I think it works fine if she's just talking about William being there. Lefty literally has no lines, and then we come to William. And honestly, the way he acts in this game is definitely the biggest problem with the idea of Mike Schmidt being the FNAF 6 player. The way William speaks in this game, it just feels very personal, like he knows the protagonist well. Especially his line,
"Fascinating what they have become."
In this line, William is talking about the missing children in Molten Freddy, since he can say this line right when he appears on night 2, which is after Molten Freddy and before anyone else. Why would he be saying this to just some random guy? It makes much more sense if he is talking to someone who knows about his experiments. Someone like his son, who he sent to his experiment bunker. But there's 2 other lines that I think are much more important that make Mike being the FNaF 6 protagonist instead of Michael weird.
Bittersweet, but fitting.
And
You may not recognize me at first, but I assure you, it's still me.
let's talk about the former first. Bittersweet usually means a mixture of both happiness or pleasure and sadness. If William was just killing some random guy, why would he feel any amount of sadness or remorse? He has quite literally never done that once in the franchise. And why would it be fitting? But if he was killing his son, it suddenly makes a lot more sense. He gets the pleasure from killing or overcoming some sort of obstacle, but there's still a bit of sadness to it since, he's killing his son. And sure, William is not a very good person, surprise surprise, and is unlikely he loved his children and whatever, but at the end of the day, that is still his son. That's gotta cause some sort of mixture of emotions within William. And it would make sense why he says it was a fitting death too. At the end of Sister Location, Michael says he's going to find William. And from the overall tone of the scene, Michael's speech slowing down when he says he's going to come find him, making the scene more dramatic, and him and William not being on the best terms in FNaF 3 or 6, with Michael definitely not trying to help him at all, it's pretty clear that for whatever reason Michael has for trying to find William, it probably wasn't something very positive. He wanted to kill him, that's what I'm getting at. And if he gets killed by William, it's fitting since he was who Michael was trying to find, and his search ended in his death. A fitting end. Another way to interpret why William thinks it's fitting is simply because William was in some way responsible for the death of his other children, and now he's responsible for the death of the other one. Either way, the line makes more sense with Michael than Mike Schmidt. And then you get to,
You may not recognize me at first, but I assure you, it's still me.
This line quite obviously means that William knows who our protagonist is, and it's someone he thinks would recognize him eventually. If we're playing as Mike Schmidt, why would he say this? Mike worked at some random Freddy's like 30 years ago that William wasn't even the owner of. This line makes much more sense if the player is Michael for obvious reasons. So I mean, these 2 lines confirm that Mike Schmidt isn't the FNaF 6 player, right? Well, unfortunately, I can't say yes for certain. I was going to save this for a section where I talk about how Mike Schmidt may play into the story, but I may as well talk about it now. I think it's very possible that Mike Schmidt knows who William Afton is. If this were the case, it could explain why William may expect him to recognize him. It's still sort of weird that he calls killing him bittersweet though. So overall, the theory of Mike Schmidt being the FNaF 6 player instead of Michael Afton seems like a pretty decent theory under this idea of him not being Michael, at least to me. Do I actually believe this to be the case though? Well, honestly, I'm kind of 80-20 on it. I think it makes sense for it to be both. And if Mike Schmidt is Jeremy Fitzgerald, it would make sense and give him an ending that isn't just him leaving the story for no reason. But at the same time, it just fits more for it to be Michael. So overall, I'm not sure, but I lean towards it being Michael under this idea, just fits better narratively. Though it does make Mike being Jeremy weird, but maybe just a weird plot point. But I think if he isn't the FNaF 6 protagonist, Mike probably just isn't Jeremy. Although I did have another idea. As we know, in FNaF 6, Henry says the job of being the manager was not intended for our protagonist. And a question since FNaF 6 came out was, who was the job originally intended for? Just a random person who happened to get it? Probably. But under the idea of Mike-tosis, it could have been intended for Mike Schmidt. Maybe he is the person we play as in the opening of FNaF 6, who presumably gets killed by Scrap Baby. I think it would fit better with the movie, where Henry seems to be actively trying to help Mike. Unlike in the games, where he didn't intend for the FNaF 6 player to take the job. But maybe he did for whoever is in the opening. I don't know, just an idea. Alright, so that's all 6 of the first games, and which games I think we probably play as Michael and Mike in. So FNaF 1, Mike Schmidt, obviously, and then FNaF 2, Jeremy Fitzgerald, who might be Mike Schmidt or just some random guy, and Fritz Smith might be Mike or some random guy. And FNaF 3, 4, 5, and 6, Michael. Though I will say, if Mike isn't Jeremy or Fritz, I think that Jeremy Fitzgerald and Fritz Smith are probably the parents of the missing children, Jeremy and Fritz. But I made a whole video on that, which you should check out after this. But I also have another idea I think fits better under this theory, but make sure to stick around for that. And something else you can do is like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video so far. I'm trying to hit 15K before the end of the year, and subscribing will be a massive help. With that said, I think now it's time to talk about some of the big questions regarding the idea of Mike-tosis. The biggest ones to me are, what's up with the FNaF 1 parallels and the FNaF 4 gameplay, and what is Mike Schmidt's role in the story? story. Let's talk about the FNaF 1 parallels in FNaF 4 first. In case you don't know what I'm talking about, in FNaF 4, numerous aspects of the game draw parallels to FNaF 1, and also FNaF 2, but those are a little less noticeable. The main night gameplay parallels the gameplay loop of FNaF 1. Bonnie coming from the left, Chica from the right, you have to close the doors on them, Foxy and Freddy need lots of attention, Foxy's in a closet, which resembles Power Cove from FNaF 1, Freddy's behind you, just like how he most likely hides behind you before killing you FNaF 1. Now, we could possibly explain these away by saying that Michael was just in the nightmare experiments we learn about in Sister Location, which seem to resemble the FNaF 4 gameplay, although you would have to ask why from a narrative perspective they parallel FNaF 1. But there's one thing I haven't mentioned that the experiments can't explain. In FNaF 4, there is this ambient audio that can be heard. It's all garbled and stuff, but if you reverse it and tweak it just a little bit, you get this. The FNaF 1 Night 1 phone call. This means that whoever is experiencing these nightmares must have heard the phone call, especially when we remember that Scott said he didn't fill FNaF 4 with random Easter eggs. Oh, and if you're curious, the FNaF 2 parallels are that the bedroom sort of resembles the FNaF 2 office, with 2 doors and the closet looking similar to the 2 vents in the hallway, and the plush trap hallway's layout is very similar to the layout of the FNaF 2 hallways in front of the office, and that's probably intentional. Obviously, the clear implication is that the protagonist is Mike Schmidt, since he's the only character we know of to have heard this phone call. But the logbook points towards it being Michael, meaning there must be an alternative explanation for this. And there are 2 I can think of. Let's start with the one I think is cooler but less likely. Now, as we know from the trailers of FNaF 4 and the Steam description, Michael was apparently followed home by something, but by what? Well, I think it's most likely that Nightmare, also known as Shadow Freddy in the FNaF 4 files, well, actually the night called Nightmare is called Shadow Freddy, but that's like the first night he appears and it's named after him, and we know Scott hides stuff in the files, so he's probably Shadow Freddy. Anyway, Shadow Freddy followed him home, and likely is giving him the nightmares in some way due to him simply being named Nightmare and being the final boss of the game, meaning that he probably has some narrative importance to the game's story. When did he follow him home? Well, under Mitosis, likely after FNaF 3, since we see Shadow Freddy in that game. It would just make sense for him to have followed Michael home after that. But really, he could have just done it, like, whenever. If he is influencing the dreams, it's possible he is responsible for the FNaF 1 and 2 parallels. I don't know why he would do this, or why he would throw in the FNaF 1 phone call, but just go with it. But of course, that's all based on my interpretation of FNaF 4's nightmares. I could be wrong, and Shadow Freddy is not involved. Well, I'm pretty certain he's involved, but he's not like causing the dreams and he didn't follow him home or whatever. But based on my beliefs, I do think that is a possibility. Or maybe when he gets scooped, he saw the MCI's memories of the FNaF 1 and 2 gameplay for some reason. I really don't know. The other explanation that I think is more convoluted, but also more likely, is that Michael just worked at the FNaF 1 location off screen. I mean, the only place we know of that the FNaF 1 phone call has been heard at is the FNaF 1 location. There's also additional evidence in the logbook for Michael working at the FNaF 1 location, with a page where he draws himself in a security guard outfit locking Freddy out. It's a different door, but still, that imagery is definitely similar to FNaF 1. He also draws himself destroying Freddy with the words power above it. Both of these imply that Michael has some beef with the FNaF 1 crew. Now, you could say this animosity comes from Sister Location, but I think if that were the case, he would have drawn them as the fun times, not the classics. Michael also wasn't a security guard in Sister Location, he was a technician. Why would he draw himself as a security guard locking out the classic FNaF 1 Freddy if he wasn't a security guard who had to deal with classic FNaF 1 Freddy? Doesn't really make sense, unless he went up against classic FNaF 1 Freddy as a security guard. Although, to be fair, you could argue that this is Fredbear he's drawing instead, although you'd have to explain why he's a security guard in the drawing. But there is another part of the logbook which asks Michael why applying to Freddy's seemed like a good idea at the time, and he says free pizza, which implies Michael did work at Freddy's, even if we want to say the logbook comes from Fazbear's Fright. Also, in the week before, it is possible for Ralph to find numerous gum wrappers that even chewed bubblegum. But we know that Michael has the trait of chewing bubblegum excessively from the logbook, so maybe it's hinting that Michael worked at the FNaF 1 location earlier than we thought. Maybe as a technician like in Sister Location. Maybe the help wanted minigames where we fix up the animatronics is what he did. I don't know, I think that's kind of a cool idea, and I think we should believe it either way, even if Mitosis is false. So yeah, under Mitosis, I'm arguing that 2 characters that go by the name Mike worked at the FNaF 1 location and heard the FNaF 1 phone calls and went up against the classics. But no, They aren't the same person, trust. Now let's move on to the second biggest question. What is Mike Schmidt's role in the story? I think under mitosis, most people will assume that Mike is just some random guy who happened to work at Freddy's and got fired. And that could be true, but can we go deeper? Well, I think we can. I think we can use the movies to uncover his role in the story. I think for the most part, Mike probably has the same character as he does in the movies, probably working at Freddy's to take care of his sister. Although of course, those could all be changes that were done for the movie, like how in the games, Michael actually isn't a serial killer who wants to kill random people. Although don't tell TikTok that. But we don't really have anything else to go off of for Mike's character, so might as well use the movies until something contradicts it. All that I feel pretty solid on, but I have another idea that is a little out there, but I do think is somewhat compelling. Throughout the first 3 FNAF games, there was this kid wearing a green shirt and blue pants. He was everywhere, from drawings to mini games. And now, what does Mike Schmidt wear in the first movie during his dream sequences? A green shirt and blue jeans. While this could just be a reference to that kid, it could also point towards Michael being this kid in the games. Also, in FNAF 4, the Freddy bully has a similar getup, although he wears a tank top and shorts. Could the Freddy bully be the green shirt kid in Mike Schmidt? I mean, sure, why not? I'm going with it. The evidence may not be the strongest thing ever, but it's pretty harmless overall. So maybe instead of Mike Schmidt being related to one of William's victims like in the movie, his connection is just to the crying child, and Garen in the movies is standing in for him. I think this makes sense, and I think this is what I'm going with. But let me know what you guys think in the comments, because I understand the idea might not be the most popular. Actually, if you want to go with this idea of Mike Schmidt being the Freddy bully, maybe the FNAF 2 guards are actually the 2 other bullies, the Bonnie bully and the Chica bully. This would actually make a lot of narrative sense, with the original 4 games being about the bullies, and what happened to them after the crying child's death. FNAF 1 being the Freddy bully, FNAF 2 being the Bonnie and Chica bully, and FNAF 3 being the Foxy brother, where he finally faces off against his father and probably helps to save his brother. And then FNAF 4, 5, and 6 expand upon his story, and it would make the FNAF 1 and 2 parallels in FNAF 4 hit a lot deeper, as Michael will be going through the experiences of his friends from childhood. It could also explain why Mike has Jeremy's paycheck and tickets to fun, because they were friends. I think this narrative is actually really compelling, and I think I might just go with it. Also, I think we should call this theory bully guards. And those are the 2 biggest questions under mitosis answered, but we aren't done quite yet. I think we need to piece together some sort of storyline under this theory, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to be using FNAF 1 to 6. I don't really think we need to get deep into the modern games. Also, I'm going with the bully guards because I really like it. In 1983, 4 friends, Mike Schmidt, Jeremy Fitzgerald, Fritz Smith, and Michael Afton, accidentally kill Michael's youngest brother, the crying child, at Fredbear's family diner. This incident would haunt the friend group for the rest of their lives, especially Michael. The incident would fill him with guilt. Because of this incident, Fredbear's closed down, and when Freddy Fazbear's Pizza opened in 1983, William Afton killed numerous children, which shut down the location, one of which being his business partner Henry's daughter, Charlotte Emily. The children would then go on to possess the animatronics they were stuffed into, like William planned. William also created the Funtime animatronics, made to lure and kidnap children. He also began another experiments that resembled nightmares, trying to see if he could recreate the state of fear his son was in before his death. He put Michael through these experiments as a punishment for him running away from home sometime earlier. What William probably didn't know, though, is that Michael didn't just run away on his own accord. He had been lured by Shadow Freddy to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza and saw the corpse of Charlotte, which would put him on his path later in life. William opened a restaurant called Circus Baby's Pizza World, hoping to get new test subjects. But unfortunately, William's youngest child, Elizabeth, was fascinated with the Circus Baby animatronic, believing it was made just for her. But it killed her, leading to William having to shut down the restaurant after 1 day, and sending the fun times to a rentals facility for the time being. To check in with our protagonist, Michael has now lost 2 siblings, killing one of them, and seeing a murdered child outside of a pizzeria, and his father has been probably very neglectful of him, which is leading towards Michael wanting his approval, so things are not going very well for him right now. In 1987, Freddy's reopened, and with it, William came back, now working as a security guard, presumably under an alias. He probably also killed 5 children here, but that's debated. What can't be debated is what happened during William's night shift. The animatronics, possessed by the children he killed, started moving around. They even tried to get into his office. So William moved to the night shift, and in his place, Jeremy Fitzgerald began working. He worked for 5 nights, and noticed as the animatronics attempted to get into his office, but he kept coming back, even on his 6th night when the building was on lockdown. But something strange happened on the 6th night. A new animatronic had come for him, and was it? No. could it really be? The same Fredbear animatronic he had seen kill the Crown Child 4 years ago. He even only saw it as a head with its jaw open, much like the bite. Luckily for Jeremy, he was moved to the day shift. William had disappeared, probably going on the run and maybe taking Michael with him. When Jeremy moved to the day shift, a new night guard had to be hired, and it was Fritz Smith. Fritz worked a night but was too curious about the old animatronics from Freddy's in the back room, so Fritz tampered with them, which led to Fritz being fired. Jeremy worked the day shift and was unfortunately the victim of the bite of 87, an incident that was quite similar to the Crown Child's death 4 years prior, although he did not die, just lost his frontal lobe. During all of this, Michael had nightmares of being Freddy Fazbear on stage. These nightmares, along with his friend getting bitten in the bite of 87, and him seeing Charlie's corpse, led to him working at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza when a new location opened sometime later. Someone else worked at Freddy's too, Mike Schmidt, who brought Jeremy's paycheck for some reason. Mike worked for a week at Freddy's and was also attacked by the animatronics. He also heard on the phone that the original night guard, Ralph, had been killed. He also saw the Fredbear animatronic, wanting to see what was up. Mike tampered with the animatronics, much like his friend Fritz, and was fired. Mike being fired allowed Michael to take the night shift. He worked it for an unknown amount of time. Sometime after Michael began working the night shift, William asked Michael to go to Circus Baby Entertainment and Rentals to put Elizabeth back together. You see, while all of this was going on, William was still experimenting, and he decided it was time for a new experiment. What if he took the original 5 animatronics and melted their endoskeletons down and put them into the Fun Times? Maybe it would fix whatever was wrong with Elizabeth, whose memories seemed to be broken. So one night, he broke into Freddy's, destroyed the original animatronics, and melted them down, and injected them into the Fun Times. He knew it was too risky to try and fix Elizabeth himself, because the Fun Times would likely try to kill him, but he had no problem asking Michael to do it. He might have not even thought Michael was in any danger. Michael did exactly as William asked, of course. Michael applied to Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rentals as a technician, just like William told him to. William also went back to Freddy's for a spring bodysuit and got spring lock. Michael worked at the rental service, doing whatever the Circus Baby animatronic told him to do. He quickly realized that she didn't recognize him, thinking that he was William, but he didn't care. Even after getting caught and stuffed in a spring lock suit, he came back for a final night. He went to the scooping room, where Circus Baby, now combined with the other Funtime animatronics, possessed by the missing children from Freddy's, told him that they needed his body to escape the facility, and Michael silently obliged, getting scooped. But this wasn't the end for Michael. When he got scooped, he was able to put Elizabeth back together, reminding her of who she was. But it wasn't just Elizabeth there. There were other children as well, and he realized they were the 5 missing children from Freddy's. He also realized something that he had been denying to himself for quite some time, that William had killed them. Ennard abandoned Michael's body. It was no longer sustainable due to rot. Elizabeth left behind a piece of her remnant behind so Michael would survive. All Michael could hear was Circus Baby telling him he won't die, and so he didn't. Michael had to go into hiding for a few years, living in shadows, taking care of his other sister Vanessa, who I didn't know how to introduce into the narrative before now, until Fazbear's Fright began production. The horror attraction had been opened to replicate the rumors of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Michael couldn't help but find the attraction interesting. The idea was so disrespectful it was humorous, and so Michael began working at the location. While he was a rotting corpse, the Fright crew were actually very accepting and let him work there. Michael worked there, but eventually the novelty of the place wore off and he left. But something from Fazbear's Fright had followed him home. An empty mascot suit of a purple Freddy, the same bear that had been at Michael's house and took him to see Charlie's corpse all those years ago, Shadow Freddy. He began influencing Michael's nightmares, putting him in the same nightmare experiments he was in as a child. He also took inspiration from the events his 3 friends from childhood went through, with Michael's main nightmares replicating Mike Schmidt's night shift, and the hallway he had to encounter Plushtrap in replicating the hallways from Jeremy and Fritz's shifts. He also showed Michael a Plushtrap doll, which resembled his father's current state. These nightmares played heavily on Michael's guilt, forcing him to face it head on. And while he wasn't yet ready to move on from it, the nightmares allowed Michael to see that there was much more to Fazbear's Fright than he had originally assumed. He began working at the location again, and started playing the arcade games, glitching them out. He knew to do this from playing the other arcade that showed his father destroying the animatronics because of ghost stuff. Ticket to Fun explains this. In those mini-games, there are vague hints of what to do, and Michael must have known what to do from the 0-point field or whatever. But there was a complication. You see, somehow the Fazbear's Fright crew managed to find an actual animatronic. Michael couldn't believe it. What he could believe was that the animatronic was trying to enter his office and kill him. Michael survived for 5 nights while playing the arcade machines that were haunted by pieces of the original 5 missing children's spirits. while also being attacked by phantom animatronics, reminding Michael of the past, I guess. On his 5th night, he played the Happiest Day minigame, which freed the parts of the missing children in the arcade machines. He also kept playing the Follow Me minigames, watching as his dad destroyed the animatronics. But something was different on the minigame he played after his 5th night. He played as a ghost child, not as an animatronic, and went to the back room and saw his father get spring-locked in the same suit that had been trying to kill him all week, meaning the animatronic that had been trying to kill him was his dad. So Michael returned for his 6th night and burned the place down, hoping to finally kill his father, but unfortunately, William survived. Michael had already put Elizabeth back together and helped the missing children, so there was only one thing left for him to do now: find William and kill him. But Michael wasn't the only one who had this idea in mind. Henry Emily, who had been guilt-ridden much like Michael, saw what happened at Fazbear's Fright, and it opened the floodgates and Henry started looking back. He had always known that William had killed the missing children, but he was too grief-stricken to do anything about it. But the fire at Fazbear's Fright inspired him, especially when he learned about how fire had a possibility to neutralize Remnant from an Afton Robotics blueprint. The fire at Fazbear's Fright had been a good idea, but it wasn't strong enough, and it wasn't contained. But what if Henry could do it better? What if he brought all the roaming animatronics in one place, trapped them so they couldn't escape, and set the place on fire? It might just work. And so he did exactly that, and reopened an old Freddy's location as a cover. It was open for a while before Michael caught wind of it, thinking that his dad could show up, and so he applied to be the manager. Somehow, he once again got the job despite being a rotting corpse. There was something very strange about this job, though. He had to salvage all the animatronics that were found in the back alley, one of which was his father. He kept working there until his final day, where Henry revealed his plan. Henry said there was an exit plan for Michael, but he thinks that Michael is right where he wants to be. And so Michael likely stayed behind, dying with his family, and finally being able to move on. Well, I hope you enjoyed my Mike Toast's fanfiction. It was a little brief, and I know there's some things I could have expanded upon, but I didn't really want to. Also, I don't believe everything I said in that timeline, even besides the Mike Toast's stuff. Some of it I just wrote because I thought it made the narrative flow better, so don't take everything I say in there with 100% certainty of it being my beliefs, but it's just the most compelling narrative under Mike Toast's. At least to me. I'm sure there's multiple different interpretations of the story that you can have. Also, let me talk about bully guards real quick, and Mike Schmidt being the Freddy bully. I know maybe it might not be the most solid theory, but I do think there is something we kind of go on for it. The number of bullies do line up with the protagonists of FNaF 1 to 3, 4 bullies, 4 guards, and it kind of would make sense from a narrative perspective. So I know it's not the most solid theory ever, but I think it's kind of cool. I think it's cool enough. And look, if I gotta talk about the slop narrative of Mike Toast's, then I gotta make it at least somewhat compelling, okay? Speaking of the Mike Toast's narrative, I don't really like the idea of Mike not being Michael. I think the story of not only FNaF 1, but the overall FNaF lore is better if we play as Michael in FNaF 1. Just makes a much more compelling story, and I think a better entry point into the franchise. Plus, he probably works there too anyway, so why not just have us play as him when he does? I do like him being the Freddy bully and green shirt kid though. I think that's fun, but that's just me. Let me know what you think in the comments. I know this video has been a little bit disorganized, but I need to get my thoughts out there. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.